LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host, Greg Moffitt. The first part of the show is free. To listen to part 2, visit legalize-freedom.com and scroll down the homepage to choose your membership. My guest today is Michelle Horsley. At every level of society, from personal to global, we face mounting crises in the 3 E's: energy, economy, environment. These have been well documented on this podcast right back to its beginning in 2012, but they're nothing new. The first major signs of pinch points involving all three arguably first appeared during the oil crisis of the 1970s. Since then, national, international, and global institutions based on and attempting to exert control over these systems have been dominated by the idea that there is a technological solution to every problem. However, at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, problems with energy supply and the monetary system are becoming increasingly difficult to manage. What this may mean for our day-to-day lives is finally beginning to manifest in mass consciousness, even as technocratic government and corporate elites scramble to suppress the gathering signs of systemic stress and ultimately collapse. The current war in Iran should give us pause as we watch an advanced society struggling to cope without water, without food, without power, without communications. Is it time to consider how such crushing constraints might impact you in a not too distant future? Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Hi, Greg. Happy to be here.
Great. This is the first time that we've spoken literally, never mind actually having a chat for the podcast. People will find links to your material online on the interview page for this. But just before we start our talk, if you could let listeners know just a little bit about yourself in whatever form you'd like to.
Yeah, so I'm Michelle Horsley. I'm married to the writer Jason Horsley. Some of your listeners will be familiar. So I've been in the background this whole time because I really don't like to be out in front. But I recently started blogging about autism, which is you could say my special interest. So that's what I know about the most, but I do a lot of research, and I'm interested in energy, the peak oil. I'm really bad at this. I've never introduced myself before. I'm really new to the podcast and being out in the world thing. Anyway, that's enough. That's good.
Okay, all good. So you mentioned the energy situation there. So you recently sent me a copy of a zine, which is short for Fanzine, and called Learning to Walk. And I've got the first edition of that, and I was very impressed with the artwork and the way the text was put together and just how it all structured. It actually triggered two feelings in me instantly, or memories, recollections. Was one that I got my start in writing and publishing with a fanzine of my own, which I published in the late 80s, starting in 1987. That was mostly music, but there was a little bit of esoteric stuff thrown in as well, which kind of pointed, to the direction that I would, later take. But in that whole milieu, the fanzine milieu, a lot of them were about the music that I liked, or still do like, hard rock and heavy metal. But there were also a lot of fanzines throughout the 80s dedicated to punk and hardcore music, both in Europe, in the UK, and in the States. And a lot of the punk bands, particularly as the 80s wore on, had a political aspect to them, and it usually from an sort of anarchist point of view. So there were a lot of songs and a lot of albums recorded and a lot of fanzine articles written about issues of energy problems, energy crisis, economic problems, environmental issues, pollution. Multinational corporations were seen as polluters. They were economically exploitative and damaging the environment and causing all manner of problems and eating up a hell of a lot of energy at the same time. Peak oil wasn't so much in vogue then. That kind of, as John Michael Greer's extensively documented, that kind of had its a day back in the early to mid 70s, and it kind of faded as the 1980s brought us in, Morning in America and Reaganomics,
I remember
Thatcher in the UK and everything. So anyway, that's sort of the general direction that we're heading in. So obviously, anybody reading Jason's work, even reading between the lines, and anybody who's looked at what you've put out there so far, realize that all of us are concerned in one way or another with what I call the three E's: energy, economy, environment. The situation that's brought us to where we are now, the milieu that we're in, what we're facing in the future, problems, challenges, solutions, predicaments as well. Predicament being different from a problem, because a problem potentially has a solution, a predicament does not. So do you want to get us started with, just say from an aesthetic point of view, what was why did you decide to do the fanzine in that form?
Right. Well, so, I mean, I must be the same age as you, because I remember that anarchistic energy in the 80s. And even in the 70s, actually, it blossomed where I was anyway. And I was really into a kind of subversive subculture. And actually, I had my best friend was, he was kicked out of the house when he was 14 and became a skater punk and a mall rat and a little punk kid. And so I used to go and hang out with him and get up into trouble and stuff. But yeah, so I remember that time with great affection, how there seemed to be a sensibility that we not to trust the authorities, to question things, to not be compliant. And of course, we didn't have the same kind of psyop pressure on us then as we do now, that's causing everything to be so crazy. But yeah, so I have nostalgia. So that was part of it. Is I wanted to do a zine for two reasons. One is throwing back to that period of time where things were sort of more straightforward, and also direct media, like things that are not digital, and also looking at perhaps at some point in the future when we might not have access to the internet, or it might be intermittent because the energy grid isn't stable. And even, before I moved to Spain, I was looking at old printing presses, and they were selling them on eBay for so cheap. And I was thinking, oh, it really would be great to have a printing press, but I never did buy one. And I think these are things to take into consideration now at this point in time, where it looks like we are into serious energy decline, and we're going to have to start restructuring and rethinking about how we manage everything in our lives, and communication is going to be one of them.
Yeah, regular listeners to legalizefreedom.com will be familiar with some of the ideas that you're bringing up there. Former guests, I know you're familiar with all these guys. I mentioned John Michael Greer, James Howard Kunstler.
Sure, love him.
Dmitry Orlov.
Yeah.
People like that. They've written extensively about this. And we're in a weird situation at the minute with energy, because we've got kind of two diametrically opposed trends occurring in the world. One is the push for green energy and net zero, solar, wind, all sorts of renewables, which are not really renewable anyway. They're not really sustainable. It's all dependent on fossil fuels. And we also have the AI, the technocratic AI transhumanist push, which is massively, never mind the internet, it's massively energy intensive.
Yeah.
So you have this growing demand for energy, not just, domestic and commercial in industrialized countries, but just in these two big trends. It's like, we've got to cut back, we ought to got to go green. But if you actually look at it, net zero kind of says it all. Never mind that's not achievable. It's not saying zero, it's saying net zero. So net zero still implies massive energy use. So we want our cake and we want to eat it, don't we, really, as a global society?
Yeah, it's peculiar because we already know by now that the green energy isn't working, right? And also that it's entirely dependent on oil inputs and subsidies, and the lifespan of the equipment themselves is not great. Like, well, depending on if there's a bad storm or not, solar panels might last for 10 to 25 years, and then they're garbage. So it's just this wrong-headed thinking. I had another point, but now I've forgotten it. Okay. So the idea is somehow it's going to be an electrical future. We're trying to switch from oil to electrical, but how do you generate enough electricity to run those giant data centers? It's mind-boggling to me. Like we don't actually have any. We don't have anything at the moment that can supply enough electricity to data centers of those size. So I keep thinking like maybe there's something in that China has developed behind the scenes that we don't know about. And so these tech guys, I mean, there's only two options really. Like the idea is there isn't anything, and then it's just like a fantasy. There's, this dream of this, electric AI data center future is just a dream and it's not going to manifest, or there is some kind of secret technology that they haven't, swept in yet. I still think the first option is more likely.
I think so too. I mean, the second one still implies a very unlikely scenario from an energy point of view. Well, okay, if there's something we just haven't seen yet, but it would have to be, at the very least, it would have to be something like cold fusion, wouldn't it? Or something, some form of nuclear. I can't see it being a completely new form of energy technology, like that sort of these people with ideas about 0-point field and everything else, like free energy. I can't see it being that. But if it isn't something radically new, then as you say, well, what is it going to be? That film Elysium, which some listeners might have watched. I haven't actually seen it, but I saw the trailer and read the synopsis. Of future elites living off planet, in a sort of a giant version of the International Space Station, living in luxury, while you and I kind of rot down here in a heavily polluted and collapsing, civilization on Earth. But then that implies all sorts of technologies that don't yet exist. If you look at the space programs of Bezos and Richard Branson and Elon Musk and everything, some wag, I wish I'd thought of this, but some wag said what they're basically doing, it's like firing a fridge, a few miles up into the air, and then it falls back down again, smashed into pieces. And it's kind of impressive, but it doesn't allow for off-world living.
Yeah, I totally agree. That I actually think it's just a PR, like part of how they have been putting collapse off. And William Sims Bainbridge spoke about this. He's the Pentagon sociologist who wrote it wasn't Changing Images of Man, the Galactic Civilization 2.0, that guy. Anyway, he said that they need to fire up the imagination of people to keep capitalism going, because capitalism, if we're not expanding into new markets, it collapses. And so the whole space program thing has been really just a ruse to make people think that we're going to be able to go into space so that we keep investing in capitalist projects and don't just abandon capitalism.
Well, I wrote an article which listeners can find on my website, legalizefreedom.com. I'll send you a link. And it was from New Dawn magazine in Australia and New Zealand, but I put it on the website later. Anyway, it's called Out of This World, Out of Their Minds, Transhumanism and the Colonization of Space. And it speaks to all that. And it talks about various failed projects in the past. One I can't remember. Again, just go and read the article. But there was one where a team lived in this hermetically sealed environment, like a desert or something like that. And
it was Biosphere.
Yeah, Biosphere, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple of these, and they were going to be in there for a year and completely self-contained, nobody allowed in or out. And if you look how that went, not good. And then there was the Mars One project, which has now just gone quiet.
Oh, yes, I remember that one too, yeah.
And that you saw the people, that was just a cult, really, at the end of the day. But it was like, yes, space travel or the possibility of finding another planet, because we've like befouled this one, is always held out there for a lot of people in their imaginations. And certainly the Apollo program of the 60s and 70s, that was, again, a function more of a Cold War tussle than it was actually about It was sparked by, the Russians have made advances in this area, so now the Americans have to do something in return.
Yeah. It used to be back in the day. Well, actually, my mother used to say this when I was a teenager, that what we should do with our garbage is just shoot it out into space. So this idea of somehow using space, using space either to rescue us from our garbage or to be our biggest like waste disposal has been around for a long time. I can't remember.
I think there was an idea, I remember somebody, two things come to mind there. One, there was the idea of literally having a trash planet, or a planetoid, maybe the moon or something where you could just like dump everything on, including nuclear waste, by the way. It's like, get it off the Earth, stick it up there. And then the twin idea there is people who were with the headiest heights of space exploration were thinking we absolutely should not, as a species, be going to other pristine planets and setting up because we're just going to do the same thing over again.
Yeah, well, we'd be lucky to actually manufacture anything if we went to another planet.
Oh yeah, well, this is one of the things that when you read about putting bases on the moon and about the Mars One or any Mars colonization project, that was one of the issues, was like you get there with nothing, and it's been such a Herculean effort to get there with nothing on this cold dead rock. If you take enough stuff to build a little shelter or something, it was just laughably impractical.
Totally.
But in magazines, you would see artists' impressions and now AI pictures of, cities on Mars, a little bit like the film Total Recall. That was the idea.
That was a great film. Yeah, I saw a picture today, like colonies on Mars, this beautiful like series of bubbles with people in spacesuits being happy, I guess. No, it's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. And what a waste of energy, like in these days when we're actually in declining production, and they're putting so much energy into this. Nothing like it must be a public relations, PR sort of propaganda thing. I mean, I wonder now if it's even AI, like the spaceships aren't actually real.
Well, here's the thing about that, and you and I are speaking now. If people are listening to this in the future, we're speaking now in 2026, in March, mid-March, and the United States and Israel have just attacked Iran in order to prevent them getting their intercontinental ballistic missile capability and then ultimately nuclear. But one of the issues around the war coverage is like how much of this is actually real and how much is AI, and that is a huge problem at the minute. And that would certainly be very readily adaptable to any project that you want to pass off as real, including space exploration.
Yeah. I've been following that developments really closely because, of course, I'm in Europe, and a lot of oil and other products from the Middle East come into Europe, and well, the whole scene. It's pretty alarming.
Yeah, well, I guess circles us round to where we started in the sense of like looking at the energy situation, and I think when you have a war, particularly in the Middle East, a big oil producer like Iran, it focuses your attention on. I mean, never mind the other fallout of the conflict, casualties, civilian, military, or otherwise, destruction of infrastructure. I mean, even putting Iran and possibly Israel back together in, as they were before all of this kicked off, is going to take a lot of energy and resources in itself. But yeah, this just serves to focus, I think, shine a light on how energy intensive the first world countries are, and how unstable, how fragile the supply lines are, the supply itself, and also the supply lines, the network, the infrastructure that gets energy from its actual core source through to not just, gas pumps at the station for your car, or indeed electricity for your EVs, but also what keeps the lights on in your house, in my house, and, what lets us boil a kettle, whether it's gas or electricity, and what we so utterly take it for granted. And yet, if you look at the situation on the ground in Iran, and to a lesser extent in Israel, how many dark zones there are in the cities there already, how many people that no longer have running water, they don't have electricity, and that happened like in the just blink of an eye.
Indeed, and I think the fallout from the interruption, the destruction of infrastructure, as you say, and then the shipping blockades and however long this is going to last, we're going to be feeling the impact of well, I think it was only like the first week they were reporting that the UK only had 2 days left worth of gas, right?
Yeah,
I guess
that's that, when you say gas, we're not now referring to petrol for cars. We're referring to natural gas that is used to fuel, home heating at the most basic level, or power stations to generate electricity.
Yeah, that's right. But it seems like I haven't heard that people are complaining about not having gas, so they must have found an emergency supply or something. But it's imminent. These we're going to be faced with these shortages imminently, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, for those of us who've been around for more than 6 or 7 years, even though the COVID situation that we all lived through was a different type of crisis, it was still global, or sorry, it was global in a way that the Iran war may quickly become. But what that taught us was a little bit how badly prepared people are, not only physically, but in terms of, their preparedness, but psychologically for any type of change to what's available to them. And in the UK, I think you were in Canada at the time, but how this manifested in lots of countries, but in the UK, we saw it. And the poster product for that consumer meltdown was toilet roll, toilet tissue. Which you probably heard about, people panic buying that. And it was so absurd because there was no interruption to the supply of any of that stuff. There was the same amount available to everybody, but because people bought way more than they needed, then a shortage quickly developed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just mimetic behavior, right?
Absolutely.
It gets broadcast like, oh, people are concerned about not having toilet paper, and then people run out. I mean, that's sort of engineered. Where we were, that nobody ever ran out of, the shops never ran out of toilet paper. Yeah, I was in Canada. Yeah. But I did notice because I did during the lockdowns, I was running a small business and I interacted with people all the time. And so I was asking them all the time, like, all the questions that you would ask, like, do you know anybody who's died of COVID? And, are you seeing any shortages or blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that there was a kind of a class difference between the people who believed in the vaccines and the virus, and then the people who didn't. So the people who were poorer tended to be really skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was, I noticed that there was a lot of faking of compliance. Which,
yes,
of course. So we don't actually know, like, when people, I've had this discussion so many times, like, can you believe, 80% they lined up for it, and I can't believe that my neighbors are like that, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm always pointing out, like, actually, a lot of people faked their compliance. And of course you would.
Well, yeah, I mean, whatever you think about vaccines or the COVID issue, not vaccines in general, but, the COVID vaccines that were developed then,
mRNA,
of course there would be people wanting to sidestep that, to be able to do the things that they had to be vaccinated to do or were threatened with, but not actually to take the vaccine. For example, even if testing was required, if a negative test was required, in the UK anyway, you could self-certify that. All you had to do was to get a testing kit or not. Get a testing kit, go online, and just fill in. Well, you didn't need the kit actually. You filled in the code number, the barcode from the testing kit, and you just indicated that it was negative, and the testing kit could remain unopened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. That was, I think they didn't have their testing system well in place yet. It struck me that they weren't actually really ready for the lockdowns when they did them, because there were so many loopholes. But I know people who, went on vacation and they traveled and they just had like one stick, whatchamacallit, the lateral flow test stick that they used to get in and out of restaurants, like just the one that was a negative, and all kinds of stuff like that.
So, yeah, well, I mean, the fact that was the case indicated to me and also the behavior of some politicians and business people, that we loosely call the elites, the fact that they were having mask-free gatherings, social gatherings, in mountaintop hideaways, including
Yes.
members of royal families and stuff, indicated to me, or rather confirmed what I believe, which was not actually a significant threat to generally healthy people.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the result of my survey of my customers, which, I don't know exactly how many, but I was probably asking at least 10 people a day, like, do you know anybody who died of COVID? Something like that. 5 days a week for 2 years or something. And what was it again? There was one person who was in an old folks home who died of COVID, supposedly. And there was another person. It was like a handful, right?
Yeah, well, obviously this is like a sort of sidebar to our discussion, but I will just say that we know that a lot of illness is psychosomatic, especially in the modern age, with the internet and with, self-diagnosis and online doctors and all the rest of it, and lots of articles about health and, what symptoms and diagnosis. So there were a lot of people who were either experiencing the normal pattern of cold and flu, who just attributed it to COVID, or people who just made themselves ill in the way that people can. The body suffers. Sorry, the mind suffers, the body cries out. As it's saying in Godfather 3. And a good example is people who are under enormous amount of stress, maybe at work or with their marriage or whatever, and they get gallstones or kidney stones or something like that.
Right.
And it's a product of stress. People's hair starts to fall out. They get a skin rash, and it can be down to what's going on in their minds and with their emotions. So there's definitely a lot of that at that time.
I didn't see very much of that myself.
Well, I'm inferring that. I'm just saying that because that happens, I think that's entirely possible. There was such a blanket propaganda wave of negativity and fear that, of course, it's going to make people ill.
Yeah, I suppose so. Though, I mean, my experience was that the people I was interacting with, like maybe they had what they called COVID and recovered. Like they weren't really sick. They said it was just like a cold mostly, or I was interacting with poor people who had other concerns mostly, and so I didn't see much of that. They weren't really very concerned.
No. I was simply meaning that people who were getting ill, I think, could be making themselves ill because they were worried, they were scared.
Yeah,
and
it's possible.
That's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
One thing that's not well understood, we've been talking about energy resources and energy supply, and if we bring in kind of the economic dimension of this, and people think about, if we want to have oil or gas, or we want to have the internet, or we want to have space travel, it costs money. It does, but the only thing we really have is resources, because money today, for like a long time, has been paper or bits of metal. Now, the paper is useful. That's a useful resource. Though once you tend to print it into dollar bills, doesn't tend to make very good toilet paper. And then you've got the bits of metal, coins, that's useful. You can melt those down, do other things. You can make swords, you can make plowshares. But money today being digital, it's zeros and ones on a screen, isn't it really? So what people don't really understand is that resources are all we have. So the amount of resources, whether it's oil or gas or diamonds or anything else, whether it's renewable or non-renewable, that's what we have. Okay. The amount of money we have is kind of arbitrary, because anybody can type in, add another 6 zeros to that. If you had control, or rather, if you got your bank statement, printed it out, and it said balance, if you then got a pen and added a few zeros to that, that would not increase your resources. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So people don't throwing money at a problem isn't any sort of solution for anything, because it's like, have we got the resources to do this? And that's just, I think, rather ill understood.
Since 2008, they've just been printing money, and we're living in this the illusion of wealth, actually.
Yeah, and money isn't energy. Some metaphysical and esoteric scholars will tell you that it is, and I understand that point, but literally it isn't. I mean, you can burn paper money, you can't burn digital money.
No, but there is something about currents, the currency and flows. Like I noticed this when I was running my shop, that that by participating, like by donating money and giving things away and increasing sort of flows through my shop, I had more money coming in. So there is something about that.
Oh yeah, there is absolutely, and that's another dimension of this. It doesn't speak to, you know, hard reality on the ground, but ironically enough, I mean, to make it tie it into what we're talking about, that may well be part of a strategy to survive and even thrive in a more constrained future. You know, it might be one way of being in the world that will make challenging times, you know, a bit less difficult.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's also there's something about people give back to you what you give them. So if you're generous, they'll be generous with you. But if you're tight-fisted, they'll also be tight-fisted with you. Mm-hmm. So I agree. Like, I think we're going to need people, right? We're going to need people working together. I where we live in Spain is in the north, and there are old monasteries all around us here. The Romans were here. They established the vineyards here. The Romans occupied this area and had vineyards for I don't know, a long time. And then when the Romans left, the what was it? It was the Moors were coming up from Morocco and colonizing, and also raiding on the coast, and people withdrew into these monasteries, and the monasteries in Spain had monks as well as families. So it was a really safe sort of, you know, a safe fortress for people to withdraw into when things became really dangerous. And without that, I don't think you're going to survive. So that's just studying like monastic life and how people survived that major transition from a highly complex society that was well organized and well resourced to, you know, like in Britain, they forgot how to make pottery, you know, when the Romans left.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the Romans occupied. I'm in a city as we speak right now, which was established by Romans as a garrison fortress town in sort of AD 78, 79, something like that, when they'd managed to get this far north. And there's a lesson in here for us as well, because we're not very good at we forget the past and we repeat the mistakes. That concludes part 1 of the show. To listen to part 2, visit legalize-freedom.com and scroll down the homepage to choose your membership.
legalizefreedom.com